A spy case that could have exposed China's infiltration of British Parliament just collapsed. And the Prime Minister, he can't explain why. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is what just happened in the House of Commons, and one MP wasn't having it. Her name is Keir Starmer, Conservative Member of Parliament, former Cabinet Minister, and she just delivered the most surgical political takedown of the year. The chamber is packed, the Prime Minister is at the dispatch box, and Starmer stands up with a folder full of receipts, literal government documents, MI5 statements, ministerial quotes, ready to dismantle his entire defence. What followed wasn't just a question, it was a prosecution. But before we break this down step by step, if you want to stay ahead of stories like this, stories the mainstream media either buries or spins, hit that subscribe button right now. Seriously. Over 98% of you watch these videos without subscribing, and it costs you absolutely nothing, but helps us keep bringing you the truth. Done? Good. Let's dive in. Here's what happened and why this matters to you, even if you don't live in the UK. 2 people were charged with spying on British members of Parliament for the Chinese government. This wasn't some low-level surveillance. These were allegations of espionage at the highest levels of British democracy. The case was solid, or so it seemed. MI5, Britain's domestic intelligence service, had publicly called China a national security threat. The evidence was compiled, witnesses were lined up, charges were officially filed in April 2024 under the Official Secrets Act. This should have been a landmark trial, a message to foreign powers. You cannot infiltrate our parliament without consequences. But then, nothing. The case collapsed. No trial, no conviction, no explanation that made sense. And when MPs started asking questions, the government's answers were evasive, contradictory, and frankly, suspicious. That's when Keir Starmer had enough. She began with something sombre, a reminder of why this matters. 4 years ago, Sir David Ames, a British MP, was murdered, stabbed to death while meeting constituents. It was a brutal reminder that MPs are vulnerable, that their security isn't just a bureaucratic concern, it's life and death. Badenoch invoked his memory deliberately, because if the government can't protect MPs from foreign spies, if cases collapse without explanation, then what message does that send? You're on your own, and that's terrifying. Now, here's where Badenoch came prepared like a lawyer walking into a courtroom with surveillance footage. The Prime Minister had tried to suggest, carefully, vaguely, that maybe the previous government hadn't really classified China as a threat, that maybe the legal framework wasn't strong enough, that maybe the evidence was always shaky. Badenoch wasn't buying it, and she had the documents to prove why. She pulled out the 2021 Integrated Review, the UK government's official national security assessment. Direct quote, "China is the biggest state-based threat to the UK's economic security. Not a threat, the biggest threat." Then she cited the 2022 speech by the Director General of MI5, Ken McCallum. He stood in front of cameras and explicitly called China a national security threat to the United Kingdom. Then she referenced the 2024 statement from the Minister for Security, made from that very dispatch box, saying China poses a direct threat to British interests. So let's be clear, everyone agreed. The intelligence services agreed, the ministers agreed, the policy documents agreed. China was a threat. Officially, publicly, repeatedly. So if that's the case, why did this espionage case, built on that very premise, fall apart? Here's where it gets complicated and suspicious. The Prime Minister's defence was simple: blame the last government. He said the substantive evidence, the key witness statements that the prosecution relied on, was submitted in 2023, under the previous Conservative government. So he argued, if the case was weak, it wasn't his fault. He inherited a mess. But here's the problem with that defence. It was this government's job to see the case through. The charges were brought in April 2024. The case collapsed months later under Labour's watch. If the evidence was insufficient, why were charges filed in the first place? And if the evidence was sufficient, what changed? Badenoch pressed him on this. Hard. The charges were brought under us. The case collapsed under you. What changed? The Prime Minister's answer: vague promises to publish witness statements, soon. But no explanation of what actually changed between charging and collapse. And then came the detail that made everyone's ears perk up. According to the Prime Minister, the entire decision-making process, the handling of evidence, the security assessments, the prosecutorial strategy, was managed by one person, the Deputy National Security Advisor. No ministers involved, no special advisors consulted, no oversight from the Home Secretary or Number 10. Just one man, apparently operating in a vacuum, making calls on a case involving Chinese espionage against British MPs. Does that sound remotely plausible to you? Badenoch didn't think so either. She asked directly, "Is the government seriously saying that only one man had anything to do with this failure? That the deputy didn't discuss it with the National Security Advisor? Didn't brief the Home Secretary? Didn't report to Downing Street?" The Prime Minister's response: yes. Just yes. No elaboration, no context. Just a flat assertion that this was handled in complete isolation. If you've ever worked in any organisation, let alone government, you know that's not how things work. Major decisions, especially on national security, don't happen in silos. There are meetings, briefings, sign-offs. Unless, of course, someone wants plausible deniability. And then Badenoch dropped the bombshell that shifted the entire tone of the room. She referenced a report from the Sunday Times. According to their sources, Jonathan Powell, the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, convened a secret meeting to discuss the security consequences of the China spy trial. Not the evidence, not the legal strategy, the consequences. Translation: what happens if this trial goes forward? What does it mean for UK-China relations, for trade, for diplomacy? Badenoch's question was direct. Did that meeting happen? Or is the Sunday Times making it up? The Prime Minister hesitated, then confirmed. Yes, there was a meeting in September. But, and this is key, he claimed it had nothing to do with the evidence. It was just a general discussion about security implications. Okay, let's think about that. You have a meeting about the security consequences of a trial. That trial is about Chinese spies targeting British MPs. And you expect us to believe that meeting had zero influence on how the case was handled? The timeline matters here. The meeting happened in September. The case collapsed shortly after. Coincidence? Badenoch clearly didn't think so. And neither did anyone watching. Now, here's where the Prime Minister's story starts to unravel. He kept insisting. No ministers were involved, no political interference. The prosecution made decisions independently. But his own security minister had told Parliament, just days earlier, that ministers were briefed, that they did have discussions about the case. So which is it? Either the Prime Minister is lying or his security minister is lying. They can't both be telling the truth. Badenoch hammered this point. The Prime Minister has now twice directly contradicted the words of his own security minister. They cannot both be right. She also pointed out something crucial. The Crown Prosecution Service, the CPS, had publicly stated that the decision to charge in April 2024 was correct based on the law and evidence at that time. Let me repeat that. The CPS said the charges were justified. So if the charges were valid in April and the case collapsed later, something must have changed. Either new evidence emerged or old evidence was withdrawn, or someone made a decision to stop cooperating. The Prime Minister promised to publish the witness statements to clear things up. But when? Soon. After proper processes. Translation: not today, not this week, maybe not even this month. Convenient. At this point, the Prime Minister tried to go on the offensive. He looked at Badenoch and said, "She's clearly not a lawyer or a leader." It was a dig. An attempt to undermine her credibility. The implication: you don't understand how the law works. You're out of your depth. But Badenoch didn't flinch. She fired back immediately. What on earth is the point of us having a lawyer rather than a leader as Prime Minister if he can't even get the law right on a matter of national security? Boom. The chamber erupted. Because she was right. The Prime Minister is a lawyer, a former human rights barrister. If anyone should be able to explain the legal nuances of this case, it's him. But he couldn't, or wouldn't, and that's the problem. Badenoch's closing argument was devastating. She didn't shout, she didn't resort to theatrics. She just laid out the facts, one after another, like a prosecutor presenting to a jury. You're blaming your civil servants, you're blaming the media, you're blaming the last government, but you cannot explain why your government couldn't see this case through. She paused, let it sink in, then delivered the final line. A serious case involving national security has collapsed because this government is too weak to stand up to China. If the Prime Minister cannot protect the members of this House, what does that say about his ability to protect this country? Silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from agreement. The kind that comes from a hit landing so hard that no one knows how to respond. because she wasn't just questioning his competence, she was questioning his courage, his willingness to confront a hostile foreign power, even when it's politically inconvenient. And in geopolitics, weakness invites aggression. Let's zoom out for a second and talk about why this matters beyond Westminster drama. If China was actively spying on British MPs, and the evidence was strong enough to charge, this case should have gone to trial. Period. But it didn't. And we're left with three possible explanations. Option A. The evidence was never strong enough, the charges were premature, and the prosecution realised they couldn't win. If that's true, why did the CPS approve charges in the first place? Option B. The evidence was strong, but the government withdrew cooperation, possibly due to diplomatic pressure or fear of damaging UK-China relations. If that's true, it's a massive scandal. Option C. There were legitimate legal or procedural issues that made the case unwinnable, and the government is simply terrible at explaining this to the public. If that's true, the communication failure is almost as bad as a cover-up. None of these options look good. Here's what we know for certain. The case was charged under a Conservative government. It collapsed under a Labour government. That's fact. A secret meeting about security consequences happened. That's confirmed. The Prime Minister's explanations keep changing. That's on record. His own ministers contradict him. That's documented. And Kemi Badenoch just did what most politicians won't. She demanded accountability in real time, with evidence in front of the entire nation. Now, whether you agree with her politics or not, whether you're Conservative, Labour, or couldn't care less about British parties, what just happened should concern you. Because this isn't about left versus right. This is about whether a democratic government can protect its own institutions from foreign interference. And right now, the answer is unclear. The witness statements will be published soon. We'll see if they vindicate the Prime Minister or confirm Badenoch's suspicions. But even if they're released, questions remain. Why did the meeting with the National Security Advisor happen after charges were filed? What was discussed in that meeting, if not the evidence? Why are the Prime Minister and his Security Minister telling different stories? If one person made all the decisions, why isn't he being held accountable publicly? And most importantly, will there be consequences for this failure, or will it just fade into the news cycle? This story isn't over, not by a long shot. Badenoch has demanded transparency. Other MPs are asking questions. The media is digging, and the public is watching. Because at the end of the day, this is about trust. Can you trust your government to stand up to foreign threats? Can you trust them to tell you the truth when things go wrong? Right now, a lot of people are asking those questions, and they're not getting good answers. So here's my question for you. Do you believe the Prime Minister's explanation? Or do you think there's more to this story? Drop your theory in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to know what you think is really going on here. If you think someone needs to see this, share it now. Stories like this don't stay in the headlines long, and they need to. The mainstream media will move on, but we won't. Hit that like button if you want more deep dives like this, breaking down the stories that matter, the ones that don't get enough attention. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This is exactly the kind of story that gets buried under celebrity gossip and fluff pieces. Don't let it disappear. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and keep asking questions.